welcome to our... He's back from the dead. So, welcome everybody. We're going to have a few talks this evening around the theme of Helyg, but not exclusively. So, for those of you who weren't there this morning, this is the 100th anniversary of the Climbers Club acquiring the hut Helyg. And I think we determined this morning, in consultation with the Rucksack Club, it's the oldest extent climbing club hut in the UK. And so there's a lot of history behind it. There were quite a few of you there this morning. We've been there with an open day talking about it. With that, I'm going to hand you over to Hilary. Hilary's going to do introductions to the speakers. We've got 5 speakers to go this evening. So hopefully this will be entertaining. So with that, thank you everybody, and hand you over to Hilary.
Right, thanks very much, Paul. Yes, Richard Hargreaves is our first speaker, who's the son of A.B. Hargreaves, well known in Helyg circles, famous for the rat, I think. So, if you'd like to come up, Richard, I'll hand you this mic.
The old thing, can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
I hope so, thank you very much. First, an apology, I'm sorry I have to wear my glasses because I need to check on my crib sheet, because it's quite a complicated thing. Number of things I wanted to say, and I need to get them in the right order. So I'll be flicking from looking down and looking up. Normally I would like to eyeball you, but I can't. I've got to do this. The main thing on which my talk is built around is a weekend at Easter 1949, when my father, A.B. Hargreaves, brought me down for a weekend. I think we stayed in Helyg because there was a group at Ogwen cottage of big names from the Climbers Club, and the idea of the weekend was to introduce myself as a 10 to 13-year-old and Jack Longland's son John, who was also a 13-year-old, but not tender at all. He was far more outgoing, confident. He'd actually done climbing before on Bridgestone. Dare I say it? I thought he was a bit cocky, actually. But the idea was to introduce us to climbing on proper mountain crags. You'll get the story of the weekend a little bit later, because there's quite a bit of background information I'd like you to know, if you don't mind. First of all, it wasn't my first trip to Wales. That came 2 years earlier, in 1947, when I brought down to one of the Penny Pass gatherings. Geoffrey Winthrop Young, if that name means anything to you, from the early 1900s, there were regular Easter gatherings of the great and good from the climbing world, staying at the Penny Pass Hotel. Big honour to be invited. You'll know in a minute while we were there. He gave me an introduction to Wales. I walked around the Snowdon Horseshoe. But now I need to think why I was there. Family history. For good or ill, good luck or misfortune, I was born into a climbing family on both sides. My mother's mother, my grandma, and Eleanor, then, as she was known, she married Geoffrey Winthrop Young. I have to tell you, Geoffrey Young was a very, very well-known leading mountaineer in the Alps, British climbs, often guided, but sometimes not. And then, he lost a leg during the First World War. I'll tell you more about that, I hope, later when I get time. Geoffrey Young was my great uncle, and that will come later, I think. So climbing history on my father's side, my mother's side, and to cap it all, I married into a third family. And I married Jane Wager, who L.R. Wager, he was on Everest in 1933. He and Wyn Harris did the first attempt, and they found the Irvine axis on the way down. His name is on the Everest Honours Board in the hut. I checked today. It's still there, among all the other famous names on Everest from the Climbers Club. Very interesting, actually. He was Lawrence Wager, but known in the climbing world as Bill. He was a very eminent geologist. He had been on the Gino Watkins British Arctic Air Route expedition across Greenland in 1930. And on that, he had noticed some particular kind of rock intrusions, igneous intrusions into the rocks of the hills on either side. That became his life's work. He became very eminent. Wartime service actually was at the Bletchley compound, where he was interpreting photographic details of which the British pilots had brought back. He died, unfortunately, very sadly, at the early age of 61, when in 1965 he'd had one heart attack already, probably due to Everest, and another one took him away. Ironically, on the very same day that he was A, working up equipment for a new trip to Greenland, and B, he was on the way to John Longland's wedding. It all looked regular. Right. Yes, right. The result of all this family connection, two things. Right, I have quite an interest in climbing history. Can't get away from it. The other thing is, it makes me quite useful at times, if asked, or invited, to be useful at anniversaries and centenaries. Many of them up in the lakes, but this one, I'm here. Thank you very much indeed. Proud to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Right, back to that Easter of 1949. That weekend, I came down and stayed at Helyg. AB, yes. He was not a dad. He was always father. To I have three younger sisters. He was father, and his grandchildren, it had to be grandfather. It just to be a dad was absolutely taboo. He had two big mantras in life. If anybody here has ever been on a hill with him? Yeah. No? Oh, right. Okay. If you had, you would know that. Two mantras in life. One, nothing is any good unless it hurts. And the second one is, a day out in bad weather on the hills is good for mortification of the flesh. Yes, I know. I suffered that right through childhood, very often. Right. On that Easter weekend, he drove me down from Ulverston, where we lived, and I think we got to stop at Helyg, and we walked up Triffin. I clattered up the North Ridge of Triffin in my clinker-nailed boots. I think he may have made me wear the rope to make me look like a real climber. That would be typical. I don't know. I can't remember. We get to the top. I enjoyed myself that stage. At the top, he brusquely, most of his actions in life are quite brusque. He brusquely tied me onto the rope. We stood at the top of what I'm sure must have been the North Buttress. Right, lad, get down that hole. Slide down. Quite easy. Go, off you go. Get down. And I was launched off into what seemed like space. Sliding, slithering, scared, rigid. I suppose it must have been a stop at once or twice when he maybe to stay and he would come down and belay again. But certainly I do remember vividly still sitting on a terrace, presumably Bellevue Terrace perhaps, with legs over in space. Are you enjoying this, lad? Absolutely scared. A, of the situation, and B, of him. I must have mumbled something like, yes. And so it continued on, slithering down till we got down to the terra firma at the end and back. I think that we probably had supper at Ogwen Cottage, where the rest of the crowd were there that evening, and then back to Helyg to sleep. At Ogwen Cottage, there was people there, Jack Longland and his son John, Alf Bridge, and a number of other people whom I didn't know. Tony Woolham, I obviously didn't know then, but he wrote an article in a journal some years ago called "Climbing with a Legend," which was the legend was AB, and yeah, he tells me that I must have stayed at Helyg because that was AB's style. I've missed the slide one actually. Could you put AB up? Right, there's a picture here of my father, AB. He's doing traverse out on the next needle. The style, you can see all the modern protection. I can date it fairly clearly because I think he's in V. Bramsell's books, which is boots. Most unlike him, he would normally be in nails. I had to do all my early climbing with hemp rope and nailed boots. I think those boots I can see, they were made for him by the cobbler in Les Odeurs near Arolla in 1947 when the Felon Rock had its first post-war alpine meet. I was taken along on that. Got a bit a bit miffed that nobody took me up a hill that time. Yes, so that's a picture of him in action at the time. Just one simple bowline knot and protection of the ear. Right. I had 3 days given 3 days climbing, and strangely, Alf Bridge. We'll see a picture, possibly slide 2 actually, with the picture of the group. There's a picture here of taken in 1935, Alf Bridge. He was from Sheffield, builder, a steeplejack. Not terribly tall, but hugely strong. There's a story that when Alf, A.B. and Marco Palace were doing the first girdle traverse of Pillar, Walker's Gully was a bit of an obstacle, and Alf quite genuinely thought he could pick up my father and throw him across. It didn't actually happen. A.B.'s there. My mother is there in the background, and this actually, 1935 was the year they got married. And then you've got Colin Kirkus with the rope round him. So now on this weekend, right, Alf Bridge took me under his wing. He coaxed me. He was avuncular, his best way. He and Dorothy, they didn't actually have any children of their own, so perhaps he particularly kind towards me. And the whole weekend, he coaxed, encouraged, every kind of way he could. But over 3 days, the first day we went on Bochluid Buttress, and then up into Coombe Bochluid with a compulsory skinny dip in Llyn Bochluid, of course. That's the way things were in those days. Then we must have done a climb on one of the alphabet routes on the slabs under Glydd of Arc. The second day was on Lewis. That was A.B.'s favourite cliff. He always liked it. To him, it's more like mountaineering, and the routes varied, and it also brought you out at the top of the mountain. Many years. When was the CC centenary dinner?
1997.
1998. I came down. Yes, I came to that. Luckily, I wasn't asked to sing for my supper that occasion. Came to the centenary dinner, but he had died 2 years before in 1996, and he had his ashes down, and he said, "Please scatter my ashes by the shores of Lake Llanall under Lewis." We are grateful. Previously, he'd said no, they ought to be on the top of Scorfell and go do a climb first, but was relieved. We put them on the Sunday after the dinner on a day which would have absolutely suited him. It was howling with wind and pouring with rain. He'd have loved it. And his ashes flew perhaps even up to the top of the cliff. He'd have loved that even more. Right, where have we got to now? Right, that's Lewis. I was taken up the Horned Crag. A.B. was taken up, or he climbed up the Aderin route, always one of his favourites there. The third day was round to Idwal, and in my nail boots I was taken up, I don't know which of the slab routes, but both I was taken up and down those. I now know, I was heard some years later, that actually Jack Longland and Alf Bridge, they'd given my father one hell of a bollocking for inflicting that Triffin experience. It was traumatic on me. That partly why Alf coaxed and shepherded me over those 3 days climbing, and I'm very grateful to him for that. But yes, they gave him a bollocking, and they made sure that he and I were kept separate on the hill for the whole weekend, and that was quite successful. Right. A few days after we got home, there was a parcel for me in the post, and it was a book. And Alf Bridge had sent me a book. It was The Mountains of Snowdonia, the Carr and Lister Mountains of Snowdonia, then the edition, which had a splendid chapter by Nully Kretschmer and John Barford on rock climbing in North Wales between the wars. Anybody read it?
Yes.
Oh, right. And that is a wonderful account for me as a boy, and even now, of the exploits of all the climbers of that generation, based on Helyg, which inspired them all and was the basis for all their climbing in those days. Colin Kirkus, all the routes to Helyg, Ted Hicks, my father obviously, Ivan Waller. Ivan Waller was actually came on that Easter weekend. We were having breakfast one morning in Ogwen Cottage. There was a hell of a squeal of brakes, a roar of an engine. Oh, that's bloody Ivan! everybody said, yes. He was a test driver for the Alvis Motor Company at that stage. And that reminds me, in those years, there used to be a CC tradition after the Northern dinner in Chester, they would like to race to Helyg. My father has stories of whichever car he had. He loved their fast driving over Denby Moor two abreast, fighting for the lead before it descends to the big S bend over the bridge at the bottom. I'm glad I wasn't there then. Other people who feature loudly in that chapter in the Mountains of Snowdonia book. Piggott, who did the first climb on Cloggy up on the East Buttress, Maurice Linnell, Charles Warren, Menlove Edwards, of course. I never knew Menlove Edwards. Many of the others I met or knew slightly, as much as a teenage boy could. Kirkus, sadly, no. He was my boyhood hero after reading that. And of course, Let's Go Climbing. I hope people here have read Let's Go Climbing. It was wonderful books. Could read even now. Takes you right in through the joys and misadventures of climbing, as if he had taking somebody by the hand and leading them through it all. Wonderful book. Anyway, though Amy was a very difficult father, I was very proud of him. Right, for that role amongst all those wonderful climbs which were done by the group, many of the people there from Helyg in those days. They say that Colin Kirkus he was a humble insurance clerk, and he used, on occasion, he would cycle to Helyg. He had to work on Saturday mornings. He would cycle to Helyg in the afternoon, climb on the Sunday, and cycle back home on the Sunday evening. One accounts call that 90 miles. Really? And did he do it often? Right. The mind boggles, frankly. Could you do that? Okay, right. A bit more about people. How am I doing for time? Not a little bit of time left. John Longland, I didn't remember much of that weekend. I knew him quite well afterwards. I was at Cambridge at the same time as he was. He was the president of the CUMC. He became a very good climber, didn't he? Munich climb, Olympic slab. And one big memory of my climbing time, on Jack Longland's 50th birthday, John led us, a group of 6 people, up Longland's climb on Cloggy. John at the top, Jack Longland was there, AB was there, a friend Harry Carslake of John's. I was the tail end Charlie, and I can't remember who number 5 was. But that was a very, very memorable occasion. I don't think John was smoking his way up the climb at that stage. I think that came later in his life. And that led me, a year later, that gave me the confidence to actually go and do the climb again, taking the group from Cambridge Club up it, and also doing Great Slab on the same day, which gave me one of my great days of climbing. Right, getting on now. Right, but I think the story of Amy's life is a worthwhile story. Right, how did he become a climber? In his family, I don't think there was a story of it, but when he was still late teenage, I should think, he was a demon cyclist, and the family had a holiday at the old Dungegill, the head of Langdale, and he was riding his bike up onto Escaws and various other places. Not a mountain bike, but believe it or not, and you will believe, obviously, he rode his bike down Rossett Gill, which was a pony track in those days. Very rough. Anyway, the bike broke. And then he had what to do with the rest of his holiday. In his cycling shoes he took to walking, and he walked up to Escaws and over Scawfell Pike one day and down to Mickledore. When he got to Mickledore, some people on the crowd climbing. Hey, what are you doing up there? We are climbers. We're from Liverpool. It turned out Lawson Cook and a group from the Wayfarers. Would you like to try it? He said, oh yes. They said, well, come meet us at Helsby next Wednesday evening. He did. He joined the Wayfarers, and that was his starting in climbing. He was born in Blackburn, 1904. His father, James Hargreaves, was a tobacco merchant, wholesale retail tobacco merchant. And I believe the business is still going. AB wanted nothing to do with that. He didn't want to join that business. Thank goodness for that. Pleased about that. He was sent to Denstone Public School, a very churchy school. He hated it. He hated it so much he wanted to send me there. Luckily, that didn't happen. I was sent to somewhere slightly more civilised. From school, he left as soon as he could, but he felt he might like to join the Merchant Navy, and he joined HMS Conway, which is the Merchant Navy Cadet Training School. He loved that. Climbing masts, tying knots, for about 2 years there, and he remained quite affectionate about those years, all his life. He was very, very difficult to feed as a boy. Very, very fussy about his food. He was as a father as well. But he spent his time, most of his food he threw out of the porthole window. And he loved to tell the story of, on that time, a VIP came up, had to come and do an inspection of HMS Conway, and a lovely steam-powered pinnace of boat with a lovely brass chimney. And he had his semolina pudding, which was thrown out of the porthole window. And he had given a lot of arduous work trying to get that off this very, very hot chimney. Right. The uncles were in despair. What? Because he had, didn't tell you, his father died very young, when he was 14, and very sadly as well. His younger brother, Leslie, at the age of 12, he died on the kitchen table while being operated on for appendicitis. I wonder we needed an NHS. He got a job as a chartered accountant in Wallasey, and then fairly soon after that, there was an advert, it appeared somewhere, Leighton Laundries based in Barrow in Furness, they wanted a financial secretary. He applied. The chairman of the company was a W.G. Milligan, who was a climber, and he happened to be president of the Southern Rock at the time. Guess what? He got the job. Surprise, surprise. And thereafter he moved up to live in Barrow, Ulverston, and became very much involved in things in the lakes as well. He joined the FRCC, and in the Wayfarers, he was a very, very powerful advocate for the Helyg experience being extended. The RLH, Wayfarers built RLH, Robertson Lamb Hut in Langdale, in about 1930-31. They made him, he was the first custodian. And from the family point of view, the very last person you expect to be a custodian of a hut with domesticity would be my father. He didn't last long. My uncle Harry Spilsbury took over from him. The Southern Rock was a bit slower in the uptake about getting ahead with it. They had been offered for sale. Amazing. The National Trust offered them Bracken Close Wood at the head of Rochdale. And there was lots of dithering and lots of debate. Quite a substantial minority in the Southern Rock didn't think they wanted a hut. And I believe, I don't know, I can't vouch for it, actually Milligan put up the money to buy that wood, and the club eventually got and built that wonderful hut at Bracken Close, head of Rochdale. It was opened in 1938. Can you put the last slide on of the right, thank you. Right, one more thing.
Yeah, 22, so...
right. You might enjoy this slide. Geoffrey Winthrop Young, with his leg. You want to know, if you don't know the story there, Geoffrey Young, right, he born in a aristocratic family, but he was first hugely important in British mountaineering before the war. When war came, he was a pacifist. Not quite a Quaker, but he had lots of good Quaker friends. Very soon in the war, the need to get troops who were injured back to hospitals from the front line, and he founded the Friends Ambulance Units. And he led those on the Western Front for 2 years. Then he transferred to Italy, where the Austrians were fighting the Italians. His ambulance was shelled. He was quite badly injured, and he had to have his left leg amputated below the knee. While in hospital, he worked out how he could continue climbing. He devised a wooden leg, and he got an Italian craftsman in Verona to build it. It had a screw device, so you could be for going uphill and longer going downhill. His first time using that on a hill was in June 1924, when the Southern Rock were dedicating the memorial plaque on Great Gable to people in the club who'd been killed in the war. Do people know that plaque on Great Gable? Very good. It is also a relief map of the great gift by the Southern Rock earlier of peaks around that area to the National Trust for people to use forever. Geoffrey gave a very inspiring speech on that occasion, and I was asked we had an centenary this last June, and I was up there, and I learnt the beginnings of that speech and was able to go in. Here he is, presumably for a penny pass weekend, And he's climbing. Who's the grumpy guy at the bottom?
Valerie.
That's AB, that's my father, in typical pose, I may say, right? Geoffrey Young is mother. Fairly, mind you, Geoffrey Young had actually climbed on his shoulder and his head to get on the rocks.
You got that on the next one, yeah.
Next one, you see climbing further up. I do love the one with his legs stretched out towards the pipeline. And finally, at the top, is Jack Longland pulling him up. I can't actually see a belay. Can you see a Jack Longland belay? I hope so. Anyway, right. There's one thing to end on. I did say, as far as a father, he was always father, never kind of doubt or anything like that. But when he was very end of his life, when he was taken into hospital at the age of 92, protesting vehemently, he couldn't go into hospital. He had far too much work to do. But anyway, he went in, and we went to see him in the Ulverston Cottage Hospital when we knew he was at the very end. And as we were there, a flicker of a smile, but not much. He was very, very weak. And in breezed in the woman who used to cut his hair for him. Not much of it. But what he loved about that was he loved having his eyebrows singed. He loved the smoke, and he loved the sound and the smell of it. And in she breathed, "Hello, Pops! What's going on here?" Right. I could never ever have spoken to my father with that, but it was a great moment for us. He died that night actually, but which is the way it goes. Thank you. Was that too long? Probably it was. Right.
Okay, so next up we've got Cathy Woodhead. Many of you probably have heard in the weekend of Storm Dara, the Pinnacle Club came here rather intrepidly because it was the book launch of Denise Evans' autobiography, and Cathy gave a bit of this talk. There were a few other people talking as well, but so this is sort of reflections on mainly Denise Evans. I'm going to chip in with some little stories as well, occasionally, when I see fit. And if I don't see fit, I'll do it at the end. Okay. So over to you.
All right. Right. The connection to Helyg is small, but this is about Denise Evans, and she was a neighbour of Helyg. So this is the A5 going from Helyg to Capelcurrig, and that's the 40 miles an hour as you reach Capelcurrig, and that is Ardingcapel, which is where Denise Evans lived with her husband Charles Evans and their 3 sons, one of whom is here today, Robin. There he is, he's right at the back, and he has been sponsor for the meal. He works at Placid Brennan, and so he will know that place very well. So this is Denise Evans. She was the Alpine Club president for 1 year. She was a reluctant president, I have to say. It was only as a result of the president being killed on Crib Gold. And this is a picture by John Clare. So Denise was born in 1931. Her mother is Nir Moran, who wrote the iconic book A Woman's Reach, which if you haven't read it, you should. And that is actually Denise on tennis shoe, not Nir. Now, this is a picture of Denise and Nir. So Nir was on the first ascent of Nir in the Clanbrez Pass on the Grocken with Menlove Edwards. So, and they both climbed a lot. You can see their socks. They climbed in socks, not hobnail boots or nails. And this is another one. So these are, John Clare. He's died recently, and these are iconic photographs that he took. Just some of them. Now, Nir married Jean Morin, who is an alpinist, a French alpinist, very good. And they were married and had Nir, there she is, in France, in Paris. Denise grew up in France and learned to ski, had a very happy childhood, climbing at Fontainebleau, or watching her parents climb at Fontainebleau. And then the war came, and Nia and Denise and her brother Ian went to live first of all at Tunbridge Wells and then at Criccieth up in North Wales. And her father was killed when his plane was lost. He was working for General de Gaulle, and I think Denise never really got over it. But here she is, Criccieth, I think, with her brother Ian. And so she went to school, a private girls' school at Llanfechyn, I think St Winifred's. There's a film, I think I can either show it now or later, I don't know. Anyway, she was a very special girl. Her headmistress called her subversive. Denise was a climber. She loved climbing, and here she is, intense. Yeah, climbing. Hard for the time. VSs and leading VS on Cloggy and places like that, and on the Grochen, Sickle, things like that. Yeah, she was a good climber, very good climber, and she met Charles Evans because they were both voluntary instructors here at Brennan. So one story about Denise, while she was living or staying most of the time at Cumdilly, and she spoke to this man over the wharf at Brennan, and it was John Disley, and said, do you need any help with climbing? I could take people climbing. He said, yes, come. So she did. She started as a voluntary instructor, and she went climbing with John Disley, and we got an oral archive of Denise, and they used to go climbing. John would pick her up sometimes at Cumdilly, and they'd go up to the Crognabusta, and it's where Gallop Step is. And one time they were sort of getting used to the crag, and they were going to do a direct climb up it, and off they went, and there were 3 climbers there ahead of them, and they were like, she says, I was very dischuffed about it. And it turns out that it was Mike Westmacott, Tom Bordillan, and somebody called Fitz, and they were muttering and pretty cross about it. But the two first men went up, and then Fitz had his, it sounded like his étriers were attached to his waist or something, and they got him sorted out, and the pair went up, and it was anniversary waltz that they ended up doing. And Denise and John Disley went and finished Gallop Step, which was their climb. Now, Denise and Charles climbed together a bit. There they are. And they were married in 1957. So Charles, if you haven't worked out, he was the deputy leader of the Everest expedition in 1953. And he was the leader of the Kanchenjunga expedition in 1956. And he during the war, he was a surgeon, first of all, and he was in the war, World War II, as a doctor in Burma. And his the story of that, which he wrote up, is on the Alpine Club website as Mandalay and Beyond. But he was amazing. It's a lovely book, so you can read it for nothing. Anyway, quite soon they had a son. This is Chuck, their first son, and not very long afterwards, a couple of years later, Denise went on the expedition, Pinnacle Club expedition, to Nepal. There they all are. So she talks about this in a film called Journey to Jagdula. Now, this is the peak that they climbed, 16,000 feet, I think it was, something like that. And The book about this whole expedition is 4 Miles High, which Tom Leppard today told me is one of the best travel books he's ever read. So for the Pinnacle Club Centenary, I organised it all, but and we republished it, and I can really recommend it as a story of 2 women that drive to India. They climb just in the Kulu region. It's Joe Scar and Barbara Sparks, and they overwintered in India, and then they joined the Pinnacle Club's Jagdula expedition. And as I was doing it, I found out that Denise had made a film of the Jagdula expedition, and so I went. That's one of the reasons I went to first visiting Denise at Arden Carport and said, "Well, this film, have you got it?" And she said, "Oh, well, it's here somewhere. We never throw anything out," and it was really good because her son Peter was there and his family, and we were all going through all these covers. It was incredible, and we were finding reels of film saying Annapurna and, blah, 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 and all sorts, and there were 3 reels with nothing on it, and so I said, "Oh, well, maybe it's this," because there was no clue. So we took a chance, and I got them digitised, and it was the film. It's 53 minutes of film we've got. That's we could show that as well, but we can't. It's good. And what happened was this film got used by the Pinnacle Club. We paid somebody professional to make Journey to Jagdula, and that's available on YouTube. So you just Google it, and on it, Denise and Joe are both interviewed, and there's a little bit of the film footage from her film. But it was a lovely project, and so you never know what's going to come from when you start. I met Joe Scar at an Alpine Club dinner, and everything else sort of stems from that, really. Then they had 3 boys all together. There's Chuck on the left, then Robin is in the middle, and that's Pete there. And Denise often climbed with them. When Pete was driving her down to Traumatic to go climbing, she used to wear her crash helmet in the car. And there's Robin, who's here tonight, climbing. Yeah, that's a lovely picture of them. Charles had stopped being a surgeon and had become Vice Chancellor of Bangor University. And not long after he became Vice Chancellor, he developed multiple sclerosis, and he couldn't climb, and he was in a wheelchair, but he could sail, and so they started going sailing, and Denise eventually bought her own yacht, which was this one, Dunlin of Wessex, which is in Greenland. She sold it to Greenland. Now, I mean, it's too. You need to read the book, okay? Because I've missed out all. What she's written about expeditions and the sailing, and she, with her son Pete, they went round South America through the Magellan Straits. This is careening. This was what you do to. There was a problem with the rudder, and they had to get the tide right and get the boat onto this. It was a very high tide and a very low tide, spring tides, and they managed to fix the boat. That last one, which very hard, I'm not very good at going backwards, forgotten how you do it. There. So this is one of the maps in the book, which is by Don Sargent. He did the maps, and this is a picture of Celia Bull. She's written the preface to the book. So Celia first sailed with Denise, and if you don't know Celia, she was with Paul Pritchard when he had the accident on the totem pole in Tasmania. And it was after that she met Denise, and they're sailing here in Greenland. And then Celie got her own boat. She lived in South America, Patagonia, and now she has her own business with a chartering boat, her boat from Helyg up in Scotland. And she came to the book launch, and she's written a lovely preface to the book. And Pete has also written an introduction. That's Denise there. And we included some of these watercolours by Denise. Now the book has been formatted and put together by Brian Maloney, who's here tonight. And if you haven't heard of Brian Maloney, you should have, because he's done the Clem Peninsula. He's done the T-shirts, the Clem Peninsula Guide, the journal, and he was brilliant. And it was really a real pleasure to work with Brian. Can't recommend him enough. So and the books I've got, yeah. So that's just a photograph. In fact, a lot of these slides Brian produced as well. So this was Denise. A couple of years before she died, and that's the book. And this is a book launch. Oh, quickly through the book launch. Yeah, we had a lovely meal, again courtesy of Robin. This was our book launch. That's Pete there with his hand on his chest, and there's Robin and others. But it was the night of Storm Dara. Now that's a picture on the Saturday, the day after the book launch, and this container had blown across the car park there. These trees were blown. You can see the trees that had blown down. You can see the water. Look, we thought it might take that bridge away. It was extraordinary. People were crossing the bridge with life jackets on, and it was just something else. So we were going to have a tree planting. This was our journey home. We were going down. This is on the way to Clongwynnet. David and I were driving home to Portmadog, driving around all these trees. And when we got down to the bottom, there was one across that we could. So we had to come back and go by Clonbarris. But all the Pinnacle Club, they were all almost marooned in the Cwmdilly, but they managed to get up the old road. But the tree planting was postponed. This was some training exercise for the tree planting at Innisettas. So that was putting up a fence around the trees, and here are some pictures of the little trees, and yep. So that was our. You have a look and see what they've done there. It's really good. Below is a little plaque. Had done Denise Evans, 1931. She died November 2023. Apple Gwilt, wild apple. And here's a. This is a Pinnacle Club maintenance meet in March this year. And they chose a spot right in the middle of our campsite. So if you go there, please water it. There. And that's a nice picture. That's Pete and Robin on the left. And the books are available today, £15. So that's at the end of the talks. Thank you very much.
This is Ian. Ian Smith, going to talk to us about guidebooks.
Thank you. For those of you that attended the AGM, apologies, because it's almost a repeat, but not quite. So I've spent 44 years of my life involved with guidebooks. I love them. I started climbing aged 14 in 1968. That's me in around about 69, so I was probably 15 years of age. Joe Brown helmet, no harness because they hadn't been invented yet. Masters rock shoes, Teflon soles, non-stick. a very minuscule rack of early nuts, some of Denny Morehouse's first nuts made by Clog, single skin tent, and the Cromlech boulders. So I've started climbing in the pass. I did my first route on Dienersbach, and at the age of 11 I'd been given a camera, so more about that later. And my life revolved, since then, my life has revolved around climbing photography and climbing writing. And this is one of my first ever climbing photographs. And it's a ribbon slab on Craig V. Lovely little V-diff, and I was talking to somebody today who just did it a couple of days ago and really enjoyed it. So it's still there to be done. This was my first guidebook. It was published in '64. Bought it in '68, the classic Llanberis North Don Roscoe book. By this time, I was a boy at a boys' grammar school. I didn't fit in. I hated it. I couldn't do rugby. That was the obsession. I wasn't very good at all the maths and sciences and all that shit. But what I loved was art and words. So I was a painter and then a young photographer. And I loved words. And I actually loved studying Shakespeare. Weird. I loved Alexander Pope. I loved Graham Greene. And it was the '60s, so I loved Tolkien. So I loved words. And what I found in guidebooks, because that guidebook only had 2 photos, front and rear cover, I discovered this. And I fell in love with the words in guidebooks. Extremely strenuous, a short, vicious climb of great technical difficulty. Difficulty sustained, protection poor, retreat beyond the crux, uninviting, and the ground below, nasty to land on. To me, that was poetry. And I fell in love with guidebooks. So I couldn't always climb in Wales. I was a kid in Wirral, Cheshire. So this was my nearest crag. And this was the 1964 edition of Helsby Crags, written by Martin Lee and published by the Wayfarers Club. And this is how basic it was. You had a ground plan. You think guidebooks are good now? Better than what we used to have. That was the only way to find a route on Helsby, was with a ground plan. And Helsby had this weird grading system. They used the numerical grading system before almost anybody else, as did Southern Sandstone in Kent and Sussex. But the hardest of each number was D. So you had a 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. And 5A, 5B, 5C, 5D. And the 5D were routes like the Beatnik, which is nowadays 6A, is it, Pete?
Yeah.
So yeah, so we had to deal with this weird system. But I loved climbing at Helsby, it was great. And in those days, we only top roped. We took our lead from the Southern Sandstone, and we only ever top roped. We never led because we didn't trust the rock. So eventually I fetched up in Sheffield, and I met these guys. Bill Dark, Chris Jackson, Bill Winthrop, still friends today, climbing partners and willing subjects for my climbing photography. And I also met these 2 reprobates, Jeff Milburn, Dave Gregory. And because I got involved with the BMC, and I was the chair of the BMC Peak Area Committee for a while, that also meant working on BMC Peak Area guidebooks, which at the time was this wonderful voluntary system with Nat Allen and other luminaries involved. It was great. And they persuaded me to get involved with guidebooks. And I met these 3, Keith Sharples, Graham Hoey, Neil Foster. And we were all volunteers working on Peak District guidebooks and loving it. And also this man, not very well known, Dave Farrant, long-time CC member, unsung hero. Previously for guidebooks, we'd had to pay for typesetting. Typesetting is the part where you get the words in a long strip and you get the pictures and you chop them up and you make the pages up. And in those days it was scissors and scalpel and glue and all that sort of stuff. And we call it typesetting. It's basically page design, page layout. There's all sorts of words for it, but I'm going to use the word typesetting. And we paid professional typesetters to do our books. Dave came along, computer nerd and climber, and he found that there was a new generation of desktop publishing packages coming onto the market. So he introduced desktop publishing to the BMC. So suddenly we saved money by not paying other people, and we had total control. And we used a dreadful, well, I say dreadful, it was good at the time, program called Ventura Publisher. And Dave did all the BMC guidebooks. If you got a copy of the magnificent On Peak Rock, that was all done on Ventura Publisher. And he then introduced the CC to it. And a man called John Wilson, who I'll move on to in a minute, he learnt Ventura and produced scores, literally scores of CC guidebooks using Ventura. And it all went back to Dave. So my first book, 1980, I was out taking photographs because by this point we decided we had to have action pictures in guidebooks. They were jolly important and they were always black and white, and I love black and white photography. Loved it then, still love it now. This was my first ever book, out photographing in 1980 for the publication of Derwent Valley in 1981, and it was a slightly weird book because it was a mix of gritstone and limestone, which for the peak at the time was quite a rare thing. We usually tried to keep them separate. You know, you don't want gritstone mating with limestone, that would be bad news. But this book had both. And I got, first ever guidebook, I got the front cover photo. Oh, how ace was that? And that's Bob Bradley on Tom Thumb at Cratcliffe. And then these are some of the ones. So my friend Bill Wintrip in action on Vibrio at Chatsworth. Five-finger exercise at Cratcliffe in the middle, and because it was a mixture of rock types, we had Zombie at Willersley, and that is a guy some of you may know called Paul Parker, a very long-standing CC member. 1982, I got my first photographs published in a climbing magazine. Thank you, Climber and Rambler, editor Walt Unsworth. And I was moaning about the quality of photographs in magazines, and my friend said, well, do something about it then. Put your money where your mouth is. So I did. I sent some pictures in, not knowing what would happen, but I thought, yeah, send some stuff in. And this is another really good friend called Roy Small, CC member, probably still is, I don't know, still climbing. And I took this sequence of pictures on Pinstone Street, which is E2, E3, something like that, sent them in to Climber and Rambler, and instantly published. I went, oh, this is me, I've arrived. So that was exciting, 1982. So we moved on with other books, 83, Stanley's Millstone, 85, Derwent Gritstone. These are two of my personal favourite guidebooks. These were the ones when I was really climbing a lot. Before my daughter was born, every evening, after work, out to a gritstone edge. And you'd go to Stanage on a weekday evening and you knew just about everybody because all the locals were out. And these, I think, are two absolutely classic guidebooks. We then moved on to cover the limestone. This time we did split it up, but we had to do it in 3 volumes. So we had Cheadale, Stony in the north, and Limestone south, the likes of Hightor, Willersley, Matlock, places like that. Really nice books, really nice to work on, a lot of fun. I produced a number of more, helped produce a number of more BMC guidebooks. But this is my old friend Bill Dark, more of whom in a moment, doing the magnificent flash wall of VS on Nether Tor on Kinder above Grindsbrook. And if you can ever be in the peak and it's been dry for a while, go and do flash wall. It's absolutely superb. It's only VS. It's brilliant. And it made a nice cover photo as well, we thought. The last book I worked on was this, the 2002 Stanage Guidebook, at which point, sorry Paul, at which point the BMC decided that they would scrap the voluntary system of guidebook production and they would employ a paid guidebook officer. And I'm afraid he did go on to produce some really nice guidebooks, but the frequency dropped off and the whole voluntary ethic, the voluntary network we built up over a number of years, which Hilary was involved in and numerous other people, just died on its arse, which was a shame. So this was my last BMC guidebook as a volunteer, and I did all the typesetting for this book. It was edited by David Simonite, another good friend, but I did all the typesetting for it. But that was the last BMC guidebook under the old voluntary system. 1984, my friend Bill Dark had left me. He'd moved. He went to Jersey to live and work with his parents. And he got there, and he suddenly discovered there was a ton of brilliant crags. But that is over 200 feet, and it drops straight into the sea. It's one of the few completely non-tidal crags on Jersey. And he knew this was way too dangerous for soloing. So he sent us in Sheffield some pictures, black and whites, these, saying, I found these crags, you've got to come, there's tons of new routes. He said, I can't do them on my own. So that is a crag called Laneth Falaise, the Black Cliff in Jersey French. It's the first crag you see when you get to the car park at Grosvenor Castle. That is Le Pinnacle, also 200 odd foot. That is now absolutely covered in brilliant routes. There's the year, which I'll move on to in a minute, on our first trip, Al Rouse did a superb E5 called Tax Exile that people who've done it reckon one of the best E5s, Seacliff E5s in Britain. Rod Valentine, long-time CC member, did an absolutely superb hard VS up here called Richard's Field, and the first pitch, 120 foot, continuous hard VS 5A, runners every 6 inches, utterly brilliant. That whole face is now networked in routes from VS to E6. This is La Tête d'Arbre, now known as Rabbit's Head Buttress. And this line here, this arête, we thought, oh my God, we've got to do that. And one of our team was Al Rouse, one of the best rock climbers I've ever seen. And I photographed Martin Boyson, Ron Fawcett, Jerry Moffat. Al Rouse is up there as just a superb, brilliant technical rock climber. And he was just amazed by Jersey. So we looked at this arête and we thought, oh my God, that's going to be hard. That's going to be E3. So Al and Richard Hashko decided they would do it, and I decided I'd take pictures from the headland where I've taken that photograph. That route went at hard VS. That bit there is 5A. That bit there is just continuous 4C jug pulling with more runners than you know what to do with. Magnificent.
I can vouch for that as well.
Thank you. So this was the team. We've got Richard Hashko, Bill Dark, me, look, dark hair and lots of it, Jim Curran, Alan Rouse and Phil Burke. We also took with us Al's girlfriend, Jim's girlfriend, my wife and Jim's 2 teenage daughters. And they all said, well, if you're going to Jersey, we're coming because we've heard the beaches are great. Which they are, I have to say. But the only person that climbed every single day was Al. So here's some pictures of Al. This is a route called Hungover, E36A. This is Perihelion, this is the 4C section. And this is a beautiful E2 3-star arête called Citizen's Edge. And we called it that because Ron had just done Master's Edge on Millstone. And we thought, well, we ain't Masters, but it's an arête, so we'll call it Citizen's Edge because it's like more normal people. But it's E2, 5B, 5C, small wire protection, just utterly fantastic. And I kept going back, 85, 86 I went back, but we had crappy Easters, 85 and 86. So we didn't do a vast lot, we did some more, but not a lot. But in 87 I managed to pull together another team, which included Gary Gibson. And we were very strict with Gary. We said, you can't take pegs, you can't take the bolts. The locals don't want them. So he didn't. But he did tons of stuff. We all did. There was a guy called Sean Hudson, who ended up as a mountain guide, guiding Everest. A guy called Nigel Prestige. And we had a brilliant week. And this is Here We Stand Accused. That's an E3, which Gary climbed on site. That's Perihelion. And this is Pericoma, a very, very bold E6. It took Gary a day to do. He up down it a few times, like checking it out, because you know if you fell off there, you've got some RPs there, and then you're on the deck. So it's proper E6. But he did it, and he did it really well. I know Gary gets a lot of stick, a lot of criticism, but if he wanted to climb, he could. And this is another route. This is an E4 called Mr. Mad Meets the Grolsch Monster. And that's Gary doing the first ascent of that. So in 87, end of 87, I produced this, published by Cordy, who we'll talk about again in a minute. And I wrote the Jersey section, Alan Hill wrote the Guernsey section. And it's the only guidebook I've ever worked on where I wrote it from scratch. There was no previous guide to base it on. All I had was handwritten notes, typewritten notes, scraps of paper. So I wrote that book and published in 87. You get no pictures inside, nice picture on the front cover, nice picture on the back cover, nothing inside. So, Milburn then reappeared in the story and he persuaded me to do this. So I became Climbers Club journal editor for a few years, which meant I sat on the PSC, Publication Subcommittee. And Jeff stepped down from that. So they said to me, oh, you'd better start editing guidebooks for the CC then. So here's Bob Moulton, magnificent man, wonderful. Climbing World owes a great debt of gratitude to Bob. And John Wilson lived at the top of Winters League, again, somebody the Climbing World owes a great debt of gratitude to, because they spent years editing and producing and working on guides. Great to work with, really good friends, really good working partnerships with. These are some of the books that Bob produced in his early days. His dad was in charge of the Royal Marines, so Bob was given an honorary position in the Royal Navy Royal Marines Climbing Club. So he produced these guidebooks for them, Devon Rock Climbs and Lundy Rock Climbs. John produced, again for Cordy, previously mentioned, Wye Valley Guidebooks, private Cordy publications, and from this, from 77, we brought him on board. Plus these two. He needs no introduction, Ken Wilson, but this guy, Ken Vickers, he founded Cordy, the book distributors and occasional publishers. Long-time CC member, great man. A lot of time for Ken. He put an immense amount into the Climbers Club and to the world of guidebooks because he created the distribution network which enabled us to sell our guidebooks. This was my first book for the CC. Jeff Milburn had started it, I finished it, Ogwen Carnegie, and it was also, we were experimenting with this 2-volume set where we thought, guidebooks are getting a bit big, you can't carry the buggers anymore. So we did smaller guidebooks, but we worked out this system of putting them into a plastic sleeve. So the shops had one item to sell, but it was 2 guidebooks. We thought it worked really well. We did a few guidebooks like that, Avon and Cheddar, West Cornwall, did a few others. But for some reason it didn't catch on and we ended up having to stop it. But we liked the concept. So I carried on editing guidebooks for the CC. Llanberis Pass with Iwan Arfon Jones, Llywith with Cal Neil. Cal Neil lived on Anglesey and would drive over to do route checking on Llywith. It took him 13 years to write that guidebook. Tremadog. And then I met this fella, Dave Viggers, at the time based in Bristol. And I was persuaded that I needed to leave North Wales and go down to South Wales. So we did this. We did the 2-volume set, Pembroke, 1996, which was a big book. And unfortunately, the crags had a tendency to fall down while we were working on them. So we lost a few crags. And then Dave produced a supplement, John Dunn on the big issue there, and 2002, yet another supplement. So I did 3 books with Dave. Then I was farmed out to another club. I was sent to work with the Minith Climbing Club, who have a hut, as you may know, in Craftnant. And they wanted to produce a guidebook. And the deal was that they would give Craftnant to the Climbers Club to go in the next Carnegie guidebook, which still hasn't happened, hopefully will. But they told me, we want to do one Craftnant book that's a Minith production. And they'd written it, but they didn't know what to do. So I was farmed out by the CC to produce this. Slim volume, not very lavish, but really nice. And at the time, it was the first time widespread information on the Craftnant Valley had become available. Then this appeared, Portland. the sport climbing explosion. Suddenly, bolts everywhere, sport routes going up. Incredible. And I worked with this guy, Steve Taylor, and we had a big problem with how we wanted to present this book. Steve was obsessed that we had to do it so that the route descriptions were opposite the crag photos. But a lot of the crag photos were landscape format. So I thought, oh God, what do I do? So, as Brian will tell you, there's now New Ink World. You go and steal ideas. So I'm leafing through all my guidebook shelf and I found a French guidebook to the Ardèche. And I thought, they've sorted it. I'll steal that idea, which I then did. And we ended up with this landscape format, not universally popular with climbers, but it worked. So the entire book, if you go through that Portland guidebook, every single route on the topo has a description on the facing page. That was Steve's obsession. So we worked out how to do it. And Steve lived nearby Portland, and he was out doing crag photos. And if he got a crag photo, it wasn't good enough, he'd go and do another. And if that wasn't good enough, he'd go and do another. So in the end, I set up the system and then passed it all over to Steve, and he finished off the typesetting. But I had to come up with a page design. And the idea I'd stolen was this 3-column grid, it's called. You put 3 columns of text. And I thought, yeah, that works. And I thought, oh shit, where do we put the stars? So and again, Brian will sympathise with this as a designer. You just sit there for hours. How do I solve this problem? And I came up with the vertical stars because look, they fit in the space. And the CC still has vertical stars. If you look at current CC books, they always have that, and it's our little design point, it's our little identifier. It's a CC guidebook, it's got vertical stars. And it worked, and suddenly we could make this book work. So this book was long in production for various reasons, and the PSC said, oh, we need a page template, a page design, because we've got other books coming along before Portland. So can you please come up with a page design for a vertical format guidebook? So I did. And in 2007, we produced the Lower Valley Guidebook, Lower Wye Valley Guidebook. And this is now broadly what you see in a CC guidebook with tweaks. People like Don Sargent and Brian Maloney have improved my ideas massively. But essentially, we were able to go back to a 1-column grid, but we kept the vertical stars because it was more efficient on space, and we were able to put photographs into the text because we had that control over what we were doing. So broadly speaking, that design, which I came up with in 2007 and then repeated with variations in 2008, is now the current CC house style. I then got dragged into working with this guy. This is Mike Vetterlein, not the most famous of climbers. But if you climb on Southern Sandstone, this guy's an absolute star. Not only did he do a lot of new routes, he wrote a supplement and 2 full guidebooks. But he also used to work with the famous Terry Tullis to keep the sandstone crags clean. And they would go out and strip vegetation and do all that. And the one thing Mike did, because people had been very careless over the years, and the tops of a lot of the sandstone had these rope grooves in that had been cut by top ropes soaring into the rock. Mike used to spend his summer holidays filling in the rope grooves with a sort of a cement, something that him and Terry had agreed with. Great man. We lost him last year, very sad, too young, only 71, but a good mate. This was his 85 guidebook, and Bob Moulton was editing it and Mike was writing it, and they suddenly thought, oh, we've got no action pictures. So we came up with a scheme that I would go down to Kent and Sussex for weekends and go out taking action pictures for the guidebooks. And the club very generously gave me some travel expenses and some film expenses to do that. And we had a lot of fun, and Mike dragged out all sorts of, Southern Sandstone eminence climbers. Robin Mazinki, who's still very active down there, that's Mike himself, and that's Tim Daniels. Tim Daniels is currently the new chair of the BMC's Land and Property Trust, I believe. And then the same happened in '08, and I spent a lot of time down there, and it was great. Mike would just recruit all these really good climbers, and they'd turn up at the crag of a morning, and he'd say, right, you, go climb that, you, go climb that. And they just did it, because they knew that it was for the best. So I was there snapping away, having a lovely time. And these are some of the pictures. We've got Graham Adcock there, Robin Mazinki, and Graham again. And it was a joy for me as a climbing photographer, because I was just given these people just, go and climb routes. And they were all good. And no matter what you pointed them at, they would do it. Then this happened, 2009. Suddenly the club realises it's the centenary of the first ever guidebook. So this guy, Bob Allen, president, he edited this book, and I did all the typesetting for it. And some of you might have seen it, some of you won't. It is a lovely book if you haven't seen it. There's some real gems in there that Bob had ferreted out of old journals and got people to write fresh. And it was a lot of fun. But the first part of the book was a facsimile of the first ever guidebook. The Climbs on Llywith, Thompson Andrew, 1909. The first pocket guidebook ever in the world. And I've scanned a couple of pages here, and what you'll see, it contains almost every ingredient of every other guidebook ever since. They didn't have grades, that was a bit too far, but they had route names, introductions, route descriptions, action pictures, crag photos, topos, almost everything apart from grades that goes into any modern guidebook, the CC did way back in 1909. And if anybody wants to see a copy of the 1909 Llywith guidebook, I have one with me. See me afterwards, and if your hands are clean, I'll let you have a look at it. I had a problem though, because in 2000, Bob Allen also decided that I should be CC president for a while, which was horrendous, because my CC presidency coincided with foot and mouth, so that was nasty. But anyway, I couldn't do some guidebooks. So John Wilson took over this one, Merioneth, which would have meant working with this guy, John Fritz Sumner, who knew more about Mid Wales than anybody alive, and I was looking forward to working with him, but I didn't. So John Wilson stepped in and produced the Merioneth Guide. A few years later, having done all sorts of jobs, designing pages and designing guidebooks and working on stuff, I'd stepped back from editing a bit, and I got dragged back into it because this chap, James Clapham, wrote to the club, and he said, I live in Newton Abbot. I want to write a Dartmoor guide for the club. Will you let me? Hang on, a willing volunteer? Of course we do. So James, I made contact with him, lovely guy, now a mountain guide, now based in Chamonix. Lovely guy, he produced the Dartmoor guidebook. And it was one of our first ever guidebooks to include extensive bouldering as well as routes. And then the following year, South Devon by Pete Saunders. And they were nice for me to do because my wife was brought up in South Devon and we used to go there a lot because she had family there. And then finally, last year, 2024, I did Penheen with Pat Littlejohn and Mick Lovett, my final guidebook, my swan song. And the only thing I'd say in conclusion is, for me, a guidebook is more than just a mechanical, here's some routes, this is how you get there, this is how hard they are. For me, if you look back into the history of guidebooks, they have the heart and the soul of climbers in them, because they're always written by people who are passionate about a given area, and they contain so much history and so much specialness. So I'd just like to finish off by saying I commend the idea of a guidebook to you. Please keep on buying them, please keep on using them, and although I've now technically resigned, I'm still there to be an advisor, and there's still a bit of stuff in there that I'm willing to let people drag out. So thank you very much.
We have some members from the Ogwen Valley Mountain Rescue Team. Glyn Andrew, who I met at Ogwen Cottage this afternoon, who I haven't met for about 40 years. He was suddenly there, and he's suddenly here, giving a talk. He wasn't intending to. And Tim.
Bob Lewis.
Lewis. Until this afternoon, Glyn wasn't coming here, so not only is he coming, but he's helping Bob give a talk. So.
I think it's the other way
Was it the
round.
other way round?
I came here to laugh at our president, Chris Lloyd, giving a talk. Well, shows you how unwise that was. I'm going to tell you a little bit about. There are no slides. You can close your eyes and go to sleep. I'm going to tell you a bit about the history and then a bit about where we are now. Mountain rescue in England and Wales started really about the time of the war. Who's heard of Wilson Hay? Right, one gentleman at the front. Wilson Hay is an example of what you had to deal with in mountain rescue. So he was a surgeon at Manchester Royal Infirmary, and in 1949 he decided that there needed to be a proper mountain rescue service in England and Wales, and he set up a system of mountain rescue boxes which had a stretcher and some drugs and bandages in, and included in the drugs were some painkillers, which was morphine. And as now, morphine is a controlled drug, and the Home Office did not like the fact that he was leaving morphine lying around on the mountains. I can see their point actually. In these days it wouldn't last long, but in any event they took him to court, and as a surgeon being convicted would have meant that he would have gone in front of the GMC and he had lost his registration. So there was a long and convoluted process, including Roger Chorley, Lord Chorley, who was the president of the Alpine Club at the time and was able to talk to people in the House of Lords. And we wound up with a situation where there was then and still is now an exemption for mountain rescue teams to use drugs in the Medicines Act. So there's quite a long history to this. My personal history with this is that my mother worked for Wilson Hay when she worked as a house officer at Manchester Royal Infirmary, and she thought then, and she still thinks now, that he was completely mad. Okay, so comes 1965, mid-60s, Ron James. Who had a copy of Ron James's guidebook when they were little? Yeah, we all had a copy of Ron James's guidebook. He was a climbing instructor, worked at Ogwen Cottage, initially running his own climbing school, and then the climbing school was sold to Birmingham Council. Great. They're employed essentially as teachers. They get long holidays. They can all go to the Alps. So they were running a informal mountain rescue team. They'd get the instructors together. They'd go off and rescue people, and there were some pretty substantial rescues going on. Fine. Comes the summer holidays. There's a nasty accident behind Ogwen Cottage. They go down to Ogwen Cottage and call out the rescue team. Well, the only guy there is the caretaker, and it's a little tricky. So they decided that they'd better have a proper rescue team. And in 1965, we're 60 this year, they formed the Ogwen Valley Mountain Rescue Organisation. And it was the first proper mountain rescue organisation in North Wales. And at that time, Chris Briggs, who was the landlord at Penny Gurrad, was also running a mountain rescue team of sorts, and that was really based in Llanberis, and we started doing the stuff in Ogwen. So Ron James, Barbara James, Roger Jones, a bunch of people set up a mountain rescue team. We were stood today by what we still refer to as the brew shack, now in a nice building provided by the National Park. The original brew shack was just that. It was a brew shack a bit further down the A5.
Caravan.
And we had a caravan behind it, which leaked like crazy, I'm told. I wasn't part of the team at that stage. So they started the rescue team, and everybody was learning on the job, really. Mountain rescue techniques are now very distinct from climbing techniques. When I got into mountain rescue, I was astonished how different the rescue techniques are. Many of them are much more related to SRT techniques in caving than they are to mountaineering techniques. So just looking at people who've done good things in Ogwen, we can say Tony Jones. Anybody remember Tony Jones? Yeah, right. Anybody get chucked out to Helyg by Tony Jones?
No, I stayed at Helyg with him.
Yeah.
Was he polite and nice to you?
He was, but he came down to our school later on and brought his stretcher and Land Rover.
I'm very disappointed. His reputation was magnificent. I mean, he was the hut warden at Helyg for many years, and he basically used it as his country cottage, as far as I can work out. He was a lecturer in marine biology. He was the chairman of Ogwen Valley Rescue Team for 23 years. And there's a lot of people giving a lot of time to mountain rescue. For instance, Ian Jones. Anybody ever met Ian? He was a senior casualty officer at what was then the Carnarvonshire and Anglesey Hospital, which is now Morrison's in Bangor. And he was a great guy. I remember meeting him first as a medical student. Very impressed. He used to smoke a pipe during his consultations, and I saw him set a waste paper bin on fire with his pipe in a consultation. I was dead impressed. He set up the first properly organised mountain rescue medical first aid course in the UK, and it was a terrific course, largely populated by very gory slides which used to result in people keeling over at regular intervals.
Nodding heads. Who did the Irons course?
Yeah. And actually, I mean, looking at what he did, you know, I'm a retired orthopaedic surgeon, and I've been doing a lot of mountain rescue medicine for about 20 years now, and what he did was exemplary. Russ Hall. Anybody heard of Ross Hall? Anybody heard of Sarlock? Okay, so there's been a big change in mountain rescue over the last 25 years because of smartphones. And people think, it's just because you get called out more. But actually, a big deal is we hardly do any searches anymore. It used to be all search. And now it's largely people who've hurt themselves and people who've got stuck on crags, like the guy today, and very occasionally searches, but they're really pretty rare now, because to begin with it was people could tell you where they were and you could usually recognise where they were and talk them down, and now with Sarlock you send them a text, they turn on their GPS and their 3G, and we can interrogate the phone and it'll tell us where they are and we can follow them in real time. And that was Russ Hoare, who is an ex-member now an honorary member of the Ogwen team, and he made that available for free to the mountain rescue community in the UK. Similar sort of story, John Hulse has set up a call logging system, which is now he's a member of the Ogwen Valley team, and SARCall is used throughout the UK by all of the emergency services, not just mountain rescue, as a call logging system. So the team has tried to stay at the front of mountain rescue practice in the UK, including introducing dual tensioned rope systems from Canada, which has been important. And finally, I'd say again that there's a lot of people giving a lot of time to this, all of it voluntary, none of it paid. And I'd hold up as an example Roger Jones.
Anyone remember?
Anybody remember Roger Jones? No.
Whispering Roger.
If you'd have ever got rescued by him and had done something stupid, you'd remember him really well. He used to get people in the ops room at Ogwen and give them a stern talking to, and we'd all be there listening. Give it to him,
You
Roger.
wouldn't have to listen at the door either. You could be in the next room.
So he gave more than 50 years of his spare time to Ogwen Valley Rescue Team, and very deservedly got an MBE off the back of it. And he's not the only person like that. Chris Lloyd, who's out on the hill at the moment, 40 odd years, and there's a lot of people have done a lot. So, quick thumbnail sketch of where we are with Mountain Rescue at the moment. We've got about 50 active members, which is not a lot considering what we do. Thank you for your attention.
There we go.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. over to you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me this evening. It's been really interesting learning about all the different kind of aspects from guidebook making to Denise to the Mountain Rescue Team. I was given quite a broad scope this evening, I think, just to talk about recent developments, and apologies, there's going to be a bit self-indulgent in places just because they're the photos I had on my phone and laptop, so there's going to be quite a few. But I've tried to think about sort of, what period to talk about, so I'm thinking more the last 20 years. I'm trying to keep it kind of near Helyg in a way, so, everywhere that's sort of reachable from Helyg, within kind of a 30-40 minute drive ideally, maybe driving quite quickly sometimes. So I'm from Bethesda originally. I had a brief spell living in Nant Peris, but it was a little bit far away for me, so I moved back to Bethesda. I started working here in the kitchens and cleaning when I was a teenager, and the same at Ogwen Cottage. It was kind of my way of supporting a bit of a climbing lifestyle when I was a younger man. And I grew up reading magazines of people like this guy, Leo Holding, climbers like Tim Emmett, Nick Dixon, establishing loads of new routes in North Wales. And I just found it really, really inspiring, and it was great to fall in with a kind of community of climbers who were just really inspiring, going out and just having lots of fun. And a big part of that for me was, coming out from school when I was sort of 13, 14, I was really taken under the wing by a couple of climbers, people like Colin Goody, who a lot of you will have known, and that was under a period where Colin was doing loads of new routing on slate. They were kind of developing these what become really, really popular low-grade sport climbs, which are some of the routes that you'll see crowds of people on today. And the other climber, quite a different style, was a guy called Johnny Dawes, who I'm sure a lot of you will know about. So he would come along. He had a couple of years where he was living in North Wales when I was around 15, 16. And he would occasionally come and pick me up from school. Often he didn't have a starter motor in his car at the time, so you'd have to start by pushing it to get it going, and there was a lot of handbrake turns and a lot of bad influence for a young man. But we'd go climbing on the slate a lot, and for me this was kind of my first love affair really in climbing was with the slate. And there were just huge numbers of new routes to be developed. It was a really exciting time. There were a new guidebook kind of was on the horizon of Simon's guide. And it was just going through these quarries with people like Pete Robbins, James McCarthy, Johnny Dawes, just trying to chase these new lines and trying to race each other for them. This is a new route called Split Decision, which is in the Golgotha area, so the top of the Rainbow Walls. And it was quite a memorable one because this was one of the kind of few harder routes that was completely all trad. You now start about 4 metres higher as there's a big rock fall. And I don't want to talk too much about slate today, but it's kind of progressed to the stage. In that period, you had people like James McCarthy climbing routes like the Meltdown in Tuckamara, which is next to the famous route, the Quarryman. And the Meltdown was a long-standing project of Johnny Dawes's, which finally Cathy did. And just in the last few years, this guy here, Franco Cookson, has kind of taken that to the next level of obsession and difficulty, climbing a direct version of that called the Dewin Stone, which is around kind of 9A plus, he thinks. So pretty interesting to see. But I don't want to focus too much on slate today. I just kind of, that for me was the sort of, there's one of the first kind of new route crazes that I kind of thought I could include here. The next though would again probably link to modern winter equipment. the curved technical ice axes, your better crampons, and a series of quite good winters around sort of 2010 to 2014. And the new guidebook coming out was loads of winter climbing development around Ogwen and the Carnethy in particular. Now this is myself climbing the Devil's Appendix in Cymydwell, which is one of the finest winter routes in the UK, I think, not just Wales, when you get it in condition like this. But it was really interesting over this period, watching and climbing with people like, this is Peter Harrison, who's a climber who's from the kind of north coast of Wales, and looking at these big crags like Clogwyn D and Mhenna Glidder, the one just below the summit of Glidder, and just thinking about these unclimbed, not previously even rock climbs, but going, is it possible to hook your way up these things? And this is currently the kind of cutting edge of Welsh winter climbing. It's a route called Lateo. They're two pictures of the same route, but you can see where you're really pulling over these overhangs into these thin crack lines. And it's pretty amazing what you can do with a pair of axes. And there's still quite a lot of potential, but unfortunately we haven't got quite as long of winters anymore to make the most of it. So this is another route up there, which is an unclimbed project. The guy called Andy Turner, who some of you may have met, who's now fully back into his road cycling and competing. But bringing it back to Ogwen, around the time I started climbing, you had folks like Jack Geldard, who some of you have met. This is him establishing a new route called Spinal Crack, which is next to Subcanavion Rib. This is about E8 in difficulty, amazing rock, and one of my favourite things about climbing at Ogwen is the rock quality. I think it's got some of if it's not necessarily always got the kind of biggest or most impressive pictures, but the rock quality for me is just wonderful. All these pockets, rough rock, generally pretty good quality. This is the current guidebook I'm working on, so the Llanberis guide is in the final stages of production, I hope. And the Ogwen guide is the next one I'm taking on to try and produce a follow-up to Mike Bailey's guidebook. And for me, growing up in Bethesda, I would just cycle up the road to Ogwen with a rope and a rack, and I'd swing around on the rope trying to find new routes. And one of my first kind of significant new routes in the area was this route here called the Great Escape. Now it's kind of a direct finish above Capital Punishment, goes again at about E8 in difficulty, and it's got, this is me, I think it would have been about 17 or 18 at the time, giving quite a good gurn as I go for the final holes. And there's
good hair too.
Good hair, yeah. It's gone downhill since then. There's a few more white bits appearing. But I would just love coming up the road and just exploring the area. One of the things I've loved doing, I would finish a cleaning shift at Ogwen Cottage, be given my sort of bacon butty and flask of tea, and I would head out and go up to Suicide Wall at other parts of Ogwen. And there's been tons of development. This, more recently, I don't know if anybody would recognise this cliff. This is also in the Ogwen Guide. Anybody got any clues where this might be? No. This is the Pillar of Ulidir, up above Macklemore Reservoir. So this has got genuinely some of the best rock in the area, but it hasn't got a huge number of routes. So this is the first set of another E8 up there. This is Ed Booth seconding, and I saw a few days ago James McCarthy led the left arete of this wall, which is a new E7. So there's still tons being done. I'm always amazed really by just thinking, you've got such a long history of climbing, and this would be one of the better routes of the last few years. This is a route on Gach de Rogov called Dispossessed, and it climbs this stunning finger crack all the way up here, E7. Really well protected, really challenging, really fine climbing, and it's you can almost, in fact, is that Helyg? You can just about see the corner of there, so it's very, very close to Helyg. And Gach de Rogov for modern climbers has got some of the best difficult climbing. This is probably the hardest traditional climb in the UK, in Wales at the moment. It's called Woodhead. It's a direct start to a route called Mission Impossible, which is climbed in the 90s, and I'm not completely sure of the trad grade, but it's certainly around E10 in difficulty or about French 8C. And I was up here yesterday actually with a couple of comp climbers or former comp climbers, Robbie Phillips and Jim Pope, climbing a route that I'd done before. It's great when you get to climb with better climbers because they can just put all the gear in for you and then put top ropes up. So we got to climb up there yesterday on the neighbouring route Heart of Stone, which is certainly, I think, possibly even the finest E7 in Wales of its time. But this route is currently the kind of cutting edge. It's quite a hard boulder problem start into Mission Impossible, and like I said, weighs in at about French AC. And James McCarthy, so probably in terms of contributions to new routing on the higher end of climbing, James McCarthy's probably been about the most prolific at the top end of routes. he's always finding little crags and buttresses and boulder problems. And then the other person would be Pete Robbins, but more on the sport climbing, bouldering front, we find them. But for me, I work abroad quite a lot, and the last few years, have been, I've just been spending kind of more than half the year working away in France as a mountain guide. But during the COVID lockdown, it gave me quite a nice opportunity to spend a bit more time at home. And you might remember during that first COVID lockdown that you could only walk. You weren't allowed to drive anywhere, so you could only walk from home. So this crag here played an important part of that period of my life, where I could walk from the back door with my rope and go and check out new routes. And Cathy, if I don't know, have many people climbed on Cathy here? Yeah, quite a few in this room. So it's got a few wonderful routes, but as a lot of you all know, it's pretty vegetated, there hasn't been an awful lot of new route development there for quite a long time, which is fantastic because for me, it meant there were loads of potential new routes. So this is next to a route called the Great Corner, which fairly recently had a rock fall. This flake apparently has fallen off. So you're no longer able to climb the Great Corner as you once used to, which means that I actually climbed a direct kind of roof version at E4, traversing beneath the roof, which is now the way to do it. But these amazing routes up the arêtes, like this one, is a really nice E5 nowadays. And then on the kind of more expansive walls near to them, they're quite complicated, take a little bit of working out to find kind of little groove lines or crack lines, often slightly friable rock, not the best gear. But once you find the lines, the climbing's fantastic on these things. And this was an E8 called, I should be able to remember my own new route names, I can't. Yeah, I can't actually. Anyway, it's very good. And this is another new route up on the same cliff. But it's quite easy to focus on, the higher end grades, I guess, especially kind of talking about recent development from my own experience. But one of the best new sort of more recently developed areas is Great Gully Wall on Craig Ysfa. So it had a fair few routes before, but not very well recorded. They kind of missed sort of the gap in guidebooks, and then Mike Bailey and Al Leary developed this cliff, or kind of redeveloped it, added a few new routes between kind of E2 and E3, or maybe E2 and E4, and it's a really, for me, it's one of the best, more recent development crags of between E1 and kind of E7 climbing. It's really fantastic, some of the best rock in North Wales, easy access in terms of you just abseil in from the top, 1 or 2 pitch routes. And of the kind of lower to mid-grade trad, this is definitely a place I'd highly recommend to anyone. So moving on kind of a bit away from Ogwen again for a minute, you had Ian brought up the Meirionnydd Guide, and more widely in North Wales there's lots of less developed rock as you go a bit further south towards mid Wales. This is on a crag called Craig of Bodlin, which has anybody here climbed on Craig of Bodlin? I didn't think so. Oh, maybe one person. But there's some quite interesting new routes to be found in places like this. And then in the Molwinion, you've got some pretty interesting new routes being found again by people like James McCarthy. And that, for me, leads me on to the kind of next thing. So recent developments you often think of as new routes, but it doesn't have to be new routes. It can be different styles of climbing. So kind of, improvements in style from a lot of the new routes that are established nowadays are after kind of extensive, like top rope inspection. Some might even be climbed with pre-placed gear. And for me, that's just the way new routing goes. I don't get on my high horse about people climbing things in a different style. But this is a new route that was climbed last year by James McCarthy called the Taru, which he gave E8. And for me, thinking about, I hope you like my chalk bag here. My son chose a nice monster chalk bag. But for me, it's just thinking about, okay, we've got routes that might have been previously head pointed, but is it possible to climb them in slightly better styles? And I think that where you see the comp climbers, I was climbing with Jim Pope yesterday, he's unbelievably good at climbing. He can climb about 5 grades harder than I can on site. And for me, that's the potential in North Wales. There's a lot of these routes that probably people like Steve McClure have pioneered, really good style ascents. These are routes that Jim will just be able to cruise up and some of his contemporaries. So this was the sort of second, on the first ascent, my friends James McCarthy and Ed Booth both led it, so this will be the third ascent, but the first flash of this route. So you're trying to get as much information about where the holds are, what gear you might need, and you take a really small rack, just hoping that you can plug it in. I'm getting pretty pumped there, as you can probably tell. But by that point, you've actually done the hard climbing, so it's not too difficult from there. just your elbows start pointing skywards. But yeah, I've been working on the new Canberra's guidebook for the last couple of years. And one of the results of that is creating this topo poster, which some of you may have seen. It's now got more routes than it had when I did it. Produced it the first time. It must be about 126, and that's not all the routes on the cliff. But it was quite a nice project. I've got a really high-res original photo, so you can really zoom in up close and see where all the routes go. But in producing a guidebook, it's like this amazing. It gives you this amazing opportunity to look at where the gaps are between the lines, which I've been enjoying and using it for. And over the last year and a half, I've been spending a lot more time back in Wales, so it's been more of an opportunity to go and investigate these things when I should actually be at university studying. But there's always next year, isn't there, to do the studying. So up on Cloggy, I've had quite a good run of form the last few years in finding new routes. This route here is a route called Cynefin up on the far east buttress, which the likelihood is that nobody in this room will have climbed there before. So it's the furthest top left. It's this amazing shield of white rock. It only had a couple of routes on it previously. That's me taking some airtime off there. I've got a nice little video. So this is a new route called Cynefin, which is, again, it's another E8 climbing up here. Quite atmospheric in this sort of drone shot. And I initially went up there to repeat this crack, which is an E7, but that was wet at the time, so I just thought, there's an interesting groove line to climb up on the side, and found this new route, which is pretty fun. But sometimes you get a bit carried away when you're climbing these areas, and a good friend of mine, I said, I've got these good new routes to do, kind of up on Cloggy, John. So a good friend from Sheffield, John Morgan, and I persuaded him to come over for a day trip to North Wales. Which he was, John's the most, and if anyone knows him in this room, he's the kind of most psyched climber, runner, person you'll ever have met. I said, I've got this fantastic new sort of E3 to do to the left of this. And then we kind of abseiled in and sort of started climbing up and working our way up, and it pretty quickly became apparent it wasn't E3. And this is an E6 climbing the left or right of the same buttress that was pretty scary in the end. But fortunately had just enough in me, but it was quite early last year. So moving down into the Canberra's Pass, again it's that guy, James McCarthy, who probably has developed some of the best and hardest new routes in the pass. So this is probably the hardest route in the Canberra's Pass at the moment, which I don't know if anybody will recognise where it is. So it's called Dark Religion. It is to the left of the final pitch of direct route, and it kind of climbs a slab and rib up here with very minimal protection. He's got something. I was seconding him, belaying him on this, and he made it look quite hard. And then I seconded it and found it was really quite hard. So that's still unrepeated, and it's a desperate slab climb, quite reminiscent of some of the slate climbs. But even now, I've been scouring the guidebook pages. It's all gone off the page, I think, the final bits of the guidebook now. But even this year, I found the tip-off from George Smith. This is up on Craigadarin, a guy called Ramon Marin, also from the peak. We found some new lines up the far left side of Craigadarin, which are really quite good. A lovely backdrop, and this is in a January day. It was warm enough to climb in the sun, just because it gets so south-facing and so little drainage. Where I really see, though, the future of harder, development in North Wales, where there's the most unclimbed rock, are up on the sea cliffs. So this is near Port Davach, just south of Gogarth, and this is a route called stone masonry, and it's a different style of climbing to that you'll have seen, it's just generally kind of anticipated in North Wales. You often go up these routes, you're climbing upside down, the very George Smith style, and they're normally a little bit wet to begin with. It takes a while for the kind of air to get in there or the sun to get in there to dry the rock, so you need low humidity. It's often very complicated working out where the routes go because they're so three-dimensional, and often these routes, when you actually climb them, they're climbed at kind of red point with the gear in, because it's too difficult to top rope it. You'll never do that. So they're sort of semi-aid climbed, ground up, and then when people eventually lead them, the gear is normally in situ, which is not like they're really, really fun to do. It's just a very different style of climbing. And it was 2 or 3 years ago I had the misfortune for Pete Whittaker to get in touch to ask for someone to climb this new route with at Gogarth. So he'd found this, again, another George Smith tip-off. He'd found this roof crack, which is at South Stack, which he ended up calling Bar Wars, and I remember he kind of brought me into the idea by giving me the first pitch of the lead, which was just about easy enough for me to get up. And the second pitch was, they're all just horizontal traverses through this roof. As you can see here, Pete is he's such a specialist at this style. I had this, you can't really see in this picture, but he's got this huge rack of gear, you know, weighing kind of 10-15 kilos extra, and he's kind of shoving his feet in the crack, hanging upside down, sort of doing weird things, stacking his hands and shuffling along, and I'm just thinking, oh shit, I'm gonna have to second this at some point. So this is currently one of the hardest routes at Gogarth, and you climb this steep roof crack, which is, you know, completely upside down, and you eventually get into this really unhelpful hanging pod. But by that point, I was like, I've made it. I'm gonna get out of here, okay. I just had constant fear of having to like keep pressing up the rope to each piece of gear and take the next swing. Yeah, so you can see I'm happily holding on the rope there, going, thank God for that. But when I say kind of its development, you know, I think some of the hardest and best new routing in North Wales. I was very fortunate earlier this year to find a new route in Wenzorn, which developed. So for those of you who know Wenzorn, you'll see kind of the line of a dream of white horses goes something like that. You've got what was T-Rex over here, and I found this old Paul Pritchard project, which climbs this wall and the kind of it's steeper than it looks actually up through this section to not an awful lot of protection. You've got basically a skyhook there, and then you've got more gear a fair bit higher there. So they've now made these amazing skyhooks which are reinforced steel, which apparently are a bit safer to fall onto. So I still didn't really want to check it. So this came in, I thought, around E9. It's very difficult to get a low enough tide. You need a low spring tide to get there, and you also need low humidity. So the day I actually ended up climbing this thing, it was very low humidity day, but it was also very cold, so it was really hard to warm the fingers at first. And I climbed it with Tim Jepson, who some of you may know, who was pretty unfortunate we didn't have to second me up this. I don't think he quite realised. He also didn't have any. Tim's does fantastically. He's in his 70s now, but I don't think he'd quite anticipated he'd be seconding an E9 in really cold weather to escape Wenzorn that day. But you get a bit of an idea. Here. I just wanted to finish off really that it's amazing just how many new routes there are in North Wales. Still to be found, especially up on the mountain crags, and if you kind of start to get to know the areas or go out on runs, you'll find these amazing buttresses. And this is something I climbed yesterday morning with John Orr. This is, I mean, it's probably not a new route, but it's never been recorded before, as far as I can tell in any guidebook. So this is on Gathgarogov. It came in, we thought, around E2, really lovely climbing, and you can see just out of picture is Helyg. So I thought it'd be quite a nice way of rounding this off with a probably not new route, but certainly first recorded ascent of this lovely E2 pitch, which I'd really recommend. You'll be able to spot it from Helyg, and there's certainly a bit of scope for new routes on the same buttress here as well. So that's a very quick kind of overview. I know it's a bit of a graveyard shift, I don't want to keep people too long, but yeah, some recent developments in North Wales, and if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Well done.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Calum. That's woken us all up, making our palms sweat. Looking at that. My last little bit I want to say is I've got some little gifts there for the people who have talked tonight. Was mention made about honoured guests. So Paul Ratcliffe, CEO of the BMC, and Dominic Horton, the president of the BMC, have come to join with us this weekend. So welcome to you, and thank you for coming. Thank you to all of you. Tomorrow night, pizza at the Nazettis. Thank you all for coming. And if you have been one of the people speaking tonight, would you mind just coming up to the front, because I've got a little gift for you. Thank you.